You didn't leave when things were good between us. You didn't walk away during the easy seasons when loving me required nothing more than simply showing up and staying, when I was whole and uncomplicated and easy to be around. You left the moment I needed you the most, in the exact season when staying would have meant something real, when your presence would have been the difference between feeling held and feeling completely alone inside a life we had built together. And somehow, in a way I wasn't prepared for and couldn't have predicted, that hurt more than losing you did. The loss I could have learned to carry. Loss has a shape you eventually learn to hold without dropping everything else in your life along with it. But the timing of it, the specific and deliberate timing of a person choosing to exit at the moment your need became visible and inconvenient, that was the part that stayed with me long after everything else had faded. At the beginning, you made everything feel simple, in a way I hadn't known love could feel simple before you. Like the complicated version of it I had always experienced before, was not an unavoidable feature of loving someone, but rather a product of being with people who were not quite right, and that the right person would make it feel different, easier, more like breathing than like work. You showed up when you said you would. You stayed when staying required something of you. You listened to the things I told you that I had never said out loud to another person before, things I had carried quietly for years because I hadn't trusted anyone enough to set them down in front of them. And for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, I felt genuinely safe inside a relationship. Not the performed version of safe that comes from telling yourself everything is fine because the alternative is admitting it isn't, but the real kind, the kind that lives in your body and not just your thoughts, the kind that lets you exhale completely without bracing for what comes next. You used to say, "I've got you," no matter what, and the words landed differently than words like that had landed before because you hadn't just said them. You had demonstrated them in the small and consistent ways that matter more than any declaration. I believed you, not because the words themselves were enough to earn belief, because words without evidence are just sound, and I had learned that lesson before you. But because you had shown me, repeatedly, and in ways that felt effortless on your part, that the words were connected to something real underneath them. At least in the beginning, when loving me was still easy enough that showing up for it didn't cost you anything you weren't willing to spend. I don't know exactly when it changed because it didn't change in a single identifiable moment I could point to and say, that was where everything shifted. It happened the way most important things happen when you are too close to them to see them clearly, gradually, and without announcement, in increments small enough that each one on its own felt explainable and temporary and not yet worth naming as something serious. But I remember when I started feeling it in my body before my mind had caught up with what my body already knew. The way your voice lost the particular softness it used to carry when you spoke to me, not becoming cruel, not crossing any line that could be clearly identified and addressed, just losing the warmth that had once been so naturally present that I had stopped noticing it until it was no longer there. The way your patience began running out in situations where it had previously seemed bottomless, in the small and ordinary moments of daily life that had once felt easy between us, and now felt like they required careful navigation. The way I began choosing my words with a deliberateness I had never needed before with you, measuring each thing before I said it, editing myself in real time, shrinking the honest version of what I wanted to say down to the version most likely to land, without causing a reaction I would then have to manage. And suddenly love didn't feel like the safe place it had been in those earlier months when everything between us was still uncomplicated. It felt like something I had to actively maintain through constant and careful effort, something that would deteriorate if I stopped tending to it with the right combination of words and timing and emotional management. It felt like something I had to earn back repeatedly, day after day, in ways that shifted without warning, so that what had worked yesterday offered no guarantee about what would be required of me tomorrow. The night everything finally broke wasn't loud in the way that endings sometimes are when the pressure has been building long enough to need a dramatic release. There was no argument that finally said all the things that had been accumulating in the silence between us. No confrontation that brought everything into the open and forced both of us to look directly at what had been sitting in the room with us for months. Just silence. The heavy and specific kind of silence that settles in when two people are sitting close to each other and the distance between them has become too large to pretend to cross any longer. I told you I was struggling that night, not in the careful and edited way I had learned to communicate with you over the preceding months, but honestly and without the usual management, because I had reached a point where the effort of protecting you from the full weight of what I was carrying had become something I no longer had the capacity to maintain. I told you I wasn't okay. And you looked at me with an expression that I had never seen on your face before in all the time we had been together. An expression that communicated something you never said out loud, but didn't manage to keep entirely hidden. Like I had somehow become too much in a single moment of honest vulnerability. Like the version of me that needed something real from you was a version you hadn't signed up for and weren't prepared to accommodate. Like loving me had suddenly shifted from something that fit naturally into your life to something that required an investment of effort you had already quietly decided you were no longer willing to make. And in that moment, sitting in the silence of everything you didn't say while I waited for something I needed and you withheld, something inside me understood a truth I had been avoiding for longer than I wanted to admit. You loved me, but only when loving me was easy. Only when it required nothing of you beyond the enjoyment of what it gave back. Only when the returns were immediate and the costs were low and staying felt like the comfortable and effortless choice rather than the deliberate and sometimes difficult one. The moment loving me asked something of you that you hadn't budgeted for, the moment my need became real and present and impossible to minimize, you were already gone in every way that mattered before you ever physically left. I used to believe, in the immediate and raw aftermath of losing you, that the loss itself would be the thing that undid me completely. That the absence of you from the daily architecture of my life would be the wound I couldn't recover from. That the silence where your presence used to be would become a permanent feature of everything that followed. But it didn't work out that way, and the thing that actually broke me wasn't what I had been bracing for. What broke me was the realization that arrived slowly and without mercy in the weeks after you were gone. The realization that I had spent months, longer than I wanted to count, honestly, making myself smaller than I actually was, in order to remain lovable to someone who was never genuinely willing to grow in the direction that loving me fully would have required. I had been editing myself, managing myself, shrinking the honest and complete version of who I am down to the dimensions that felt safe to present to you, and I had done it so gradually and so thoroughly that I had almost stopped noticing I was doing it at all. I had mistaken that shrinking for compromise, had told myself that making yourself smaller for someone you love is just what love requires of you, that the discomfort of it was a normal feature of caring deeply about another person rather than a signal worth paying attention to. But it wasn't compromise. It was erasure. And the person being erased was me, piece by careful piece, in the service of a love that was always going to have conditions I hadn't been told about up front. And the hardest part of all of it, the part that took the longest to sit with and the longest to say out loud, even to myself, was this. You didn't change when things got difficult between us. You didn't become a different person, or transform into something I couldn't have predicted from the person I had known at the beginning. You just stopped pretending. The conditions were always there underneath the warmth and the presence, and the I've got you no matter what. They were waiting quietly in the background for the moment when honoring them would cost you something real, for the moment when my need would test whether the love you had been offering me was the unconditional kind, or the kind that comes with a limit you only discover when you accidentally reach it. And when that moment came, when I finally needed you in a way that required something genuine from you, the pretending stopped, and what was left underneath it told me everything I should have been paying more attention to all along. You only loved me when it was easy, and for a long time I thought that meant something was wrong with me, that my need had been too large, or my vulnerability too much, or my honest self too difficult to love without conditions attached to it. But I understand it differently now, on the other side of all of it, with enough distance to see it clearly. It didn't mean I was too much. It meant you were not enough for what I actually needed, not willing to grow into the kind of love that stays when staying requires real and deliberate effort, not capable of offering the kind of presence that doesn't quietly calculate the cost before deciding whether to show up. And the person I was before I started shrinking myself to fit inside your conditions, the full and honest and unedited version of me that existed before I learned to make myself small enough to feel safe around you. That person deserved better than a love that only showed up when it was convenient. I know that now, and knowing it, even though it arrived through something painful, and even though it cost me more than I expected the lesson to cost, is the thing I am choosing to carry forward. Not the loss of you, not the silence you left behind, but the return of myself.